Lygus' notes made it very clear that he designed each of Amphorius' Titan protocols to simulate the behavior of existing eons and paths. By the first half of version 3.5, we knew 9 of the 12 Titans' associated paths, and with that many confirmed pairings, I figured I could figure out the remaining 3 through process of elimination, even though there are 6 more paths than there are Titans. My hypothesis was that we could eliminate paths that overlapped or split from other paths. For example, Order was assimilated to Harmony, and since we already have a representative for Order, we could eliminate Harmony from the list of available paths. Now this concept worked really well until the second half of 3.5 when Ceredra identified Tribby as Harmony instead of Finality, which was the path that I had assigned to her because Terminus moves backwards through time and Tribby aged backwards. And also Terminus is related to train stations and Tribby's passages authority felt very trailblazy, and trailblazers are also train related. Now obviously this declaration of Tribby as Harmony broke my initial rationale for the Titan Path matchups that I had because it couldn't really account for the existence of Order and Harmony at the same time. And I was really salty about it because it was a really cool idea and this entire video was already written, recorded, and edited. Fortunately for this rust bucket, breaking my initial theory gave me an even better idea, although it's a little less neat and tidy. Instead of Lygus trying to consolidate paths, I think what we're witnessing is a bizarre phenomenon wherein the Titans are actually repeating the history or fates of Star Rail's eons. In other words, in trying to make Amphorius' Titan protocols simulate the behavior of existing eons and paths, Lygus actually got it a bit more right than he expected. Now this theory isn't perfect, but it's interesting at least, so I hope you enjoy it. Now let me walk you through my thought process by first filling out our table of initial Titan path pairings. Our confirmed Titans include Trickery, Death, Reason, Law, Romance, Strife, Earth, Ocean, Passages, and technically Time and World-Bearing, but we're gonna circle back to those last 2 in a second. Trickery is Elation, Death is Equilibrium, Reason is Erudition, Law is Order, that's funny, Romance is Beauty, Strife is Hunt, Ocean is Nihility, Earth is arguably Permanence, and Passages is Harmony. These first 9 combinations were told to us in As I've Written's observation notes and Ceredra's text messages. I know I've said both Ceredra and Ceredra, it's gonna happen again, I'm sorry. Now the reason why Earth is somewhat tentative here is because its relationship with Permanence could be solely due to the influence of Dan Heng taking over the authority of Terravox, but Permanence and Earth are linked together in As I've Written stories rather than its observation notes, so I think the relationship is still pretty solid all the same. So that means our table looks a bit like this, which is pretty straightforward, right? Now I was a little surprised at first to see Strife as Hunt and Death as Equilibrium, but they do make sense when you stop to think about it a little bit. Death comes for everyone equally and is also made out of 2 demigods, which hold 1 authority, which is the same as Ho-Oh, the Eon of Equilibrium. And Nikador is always on the hunt, so Strife as Hunt also makes sense. Rest in peace, Strife the Preservation Theory. Now as an important side note, I have a lot of thoughts about Ocean being Nihility, but we're gonna come back to that once the rest of this table is filled out, so yeah. Now, technically speaking, this is not a complete list of all of the confirmed Titan Path pairings that we have. We do also have Titan Path pairings for both time and world-bearing, but this is where our first reasonable assumption comes into play. See, both of these paths have more than one associated demigod, and for that reason, I think the protocols started out paired with one path, but ended up paired with another path. In other words, Phynon and Cyrene were initially designed with one path in mind, but when they handed over their authorities to other demigods, I think the shape of those paths changed. So initially, the Titan of Time should have been associated with the path of remembrance, while the Titan of World-Bearing should have been associated with destruction. But that only applies when the assigned demigods were Cyrene and Phynon respectively. Once those paths were handed off to Evernight and the Trailblazer, I think the paths for Time and World-Bearing changed from remembrance and destruction to Enigmata and Trailblaze. So I'm adding another column with the demigod names in order to keep things readable on this table. This also means that we have 2 paths associated with both time and world-bearing. Now, it is possible that these Titan protocols don't change path associations when different demigods are assigned, but instead gain path associations. For example, the Trailblazer has a seed of Nanook inside of them, so they can still exhibit traits of destruction while being primarily associated with the Trailblaze. Also, Akavili turned into Nanook is a very popular theory that has some merit, but I don't really want to explain it all right now, so I'm gonna link some other people's theories in the description for you. As an additional example, Evernight can still exhibit traits of remembrance while being primarily associated with the Enigmata, because these 2 paths are actually really closely related. Legend has it that Methus, the Enigmata, was born from Fuli's Remembrance Garden, after all. Okay, so funny thing about this, just before I sat down to review the final edit for this, we got the teaser trailer for Evernight, which revealed that March 7th was also born literally of remembrance. She might even be a fragment of Fuli herself. Hard to say. Either way, find it very interesting that from this March 7th, who was birthed from remembrance, is Evernight, the Enigmata. Anyway, back to Past Me. That said, we are still a bit lopsided with only one Titan left and 5 paths still needing to be assigned. Those paths are Abundance, Propagation, Veracity, Preservation, and Finality. In my original theory, I could eliminate most of these paths due to them being either assimilated or split paths, but like I said, that logic doesn't actually hold up in practice. So, how do we reduce our list now? Well, we can follow the example of the Trailblazer, Phynon, Cyrene, and Evernight and double up. Not indiscriminately though, there has to be some logic to this. Okay, so Cyrene passed on her authority of time to Evernight, so the authority evolved to include both Remembrance and Enigmata under the care of Evernight. But Cyrene isn't dead. Cyrene is experiencing an evolution of her own, as we can see in her fresh-off-the-press splash art. But unlike other Chrysos heirs, she doesn't have a Titan or authority assigned to her here. So that suggests that this version of her left the authority of time behind, which would give her an entirely new authority, and it would also make her a brand new Titan, the 13th Titan. Now, I personally think her new authority is associated with the path of finality for 2 reasons. The first reason is very simple. Cyrene is based off of a character from Honkai Impact 3rd who was an entity born of the Cocoon of Finality, and she was also number 0 or 13 or both of the 13 Flame Chasers. Hoyo loves repeating themes across games, so it would make sense for them to do it here as well. I mean, they're already technically doing it through all of Amphorius. Not the point. The second reason is a little less straightforward, so stick with me. Cyrene originally started out on the Remembrance path, and Remembrance is governed by the Aeon Fuli. Fuli's modus operandi is to record and preserve the record of the universe's memory, so that the universe can be recreated from those memories after the universe reaches its inevitable end. This creates a sort of eternal cosmic cycle of death and rebirth from the universe's ashes, which the Greeks called the eternal recurrence. Boy, it sure would be funny if Hoyo referenced that in this game, huh? Now in Star Rail, Terminus, the Aeon of Finality, is the one who exists at the end of time, and thus moves backwards through time. Reaching finality should mean reaching the end of the universe, and so if Cyrene was originally time and met her end, then it makes sense for her to become finality. If she's the 13th Mother Titan that this text from the Numero file suggests exists, then she'd represent both the beginning and the end of Amphorius's time, and also that moment in the universe where all time ends and Fuli's memories are used to restart time to rebuild the universe. This also works really well with Cyrene's name, meaning Ripples of Past Reverie. For this reason, and many others, I think it's very important that Evernight, the new inheritor of Time's authority, has aspects of Mythos the Enigmata in her, because the Enigmata can obscure past memories to create new future possibilities. The Enigmata's myths in one cycle become the truth of the next. And this is a very important part of the rebirth process, because if you just try to rebuild the world from its memories exactly as it was, you're gonna get the same result over and over and over again. It's only through mixing things up a bit or misremembering things that you get new possibilities. And with all that in mind, all of this implied relationship between Evernight and Cyrene starts to feel a bit more important. But that's a topic for another time. Moving on to propagation. I want to double this path up with Aglaya's Path of Beauty. Not only does Aglaya have lots of bugs or nymphs that serve her, but she also met the same end as Tazeronth, and Tazeronth was the Aeon of Propagation. In case you forgot, Tazeronth technically died while being sealed in the golden amber of Qlipoth, the Preservation, while Aglaya died in a pool of gold in the fortress of the Skyfolk. Her nymphs even persist after her death, just like Tazeronth's swarms persist after theirs. Now I have to quickly pause and touch on Hyacinth's authority for this to make sense, because I think her authority of the sky actually matches with the Preservation. After all, it was Sky's authority that established the protective barrier or firmament that surrounded Amphorius, and that barrier is very similar to Qlipoth's giant space wall that's meant to keep out the Leviathans. And yeah, sure, she's a healer, which should suggest an affiliation with abundance, but technically speaking, Hyacinth wanted to protect everyone, not necessarily heal everyone, or seek out immortal life or whatever like that. In the end, she always chooses to become the sky that protects the people below her. So, in the same way that Tazeronth died in Qlipoth's golden amber, Aglaya died in Hyacinth's golden pools in her sky fortress. Although technically speaking, Aglaya was already dead at that point. The first time she died, she had her spirit put into a physical object, a bracelet, which in my opinion relates to how Adrilla the Beauty died. Because it's said that Adrilla still exists within a bunch of fragmented mirror shards that you could potentially collect and reassemble to revive the god. After Aglaia had her Adrilla-like death, she had a Tayzeranth-like death, dying in a pool of gold. Now initially I didn't have a way to connect the paths of propagation and beauty together, apart from a few silly things like how we first meet Argenti inside of a swarm, and how the Knights of Beauty in general have this whole thing about turning into monsters, or maybe bugs. And beauty belongs to the romance titan, and romance and propagation, they're kind of related topics. Little things. But then I stumbled on this really awesome theory by Kamoyart on Tumblr from last year. His thesis was that Xipe, the Harmony, was actually a blend of 3 eons: Tayzeranth, Enna, and Adrilla. I'll let you read the whole theory properly for yourself because it really deserves the love and attention, and I really don't want to steal his thunder. So here are the big reasons why I like this theory instead. Enna was the one who came up with the plan to defeat Tayzeranth, but their plan was never really told to us. So Kamoyart theorized that Enna's plan was to blend the power of order and beauty together in order to calm or harmonize the propagation. Tayzeranth was an eon of chaos who saw little meaning to life beyond that of procreation. So if Adrilla is all about seeing the beauty in the concept of life itself, then Adrilla would allow Tayzeranth to acquire meaning in living beyond procreation. Meanwhile, Enna provides the counter to Tayzeranth's chaos by providing order, and therefore structure. Now Qlipoth, the one who was responsible for enacting Enna's plan, possessed the power over transmutation, so it's very possible that Enna wanted them to use that ability to fuse those 3 eons together, to take 3 ingredients and transmute them into something new. The fact that Xipe possesses 3 faces also supports the idea that they had 3 deities converging within them, and as Kamoyart points out, the symbol for propagation and harmony are actually very similar when compared to how they appear in Swarm Disaster. In fact, Harmony's symbol looks a lot like what you would get if you mixed the symbol of the propagation with the symbol of order. I'd love to comment on what the symbol of beauty looks like, but we don't actually know, so I can't do that. Now, I do need to add one little caveat here, and that is the fact that Tayzeranth is technically not dead, they are sealed in amber. But I think this doesn't actually hinder the theory any. It just changes some of the nuance. So instead of fusing 3 eons together, Qlipoth would have fused 3 paths together. To put it another way, Qlipoth may have forced the paths of beauty, order, and propagation to converge into the path of harmony, and that new path, the fact that it existed, gave rise to Xipe. I think the fates of the eons can be considered separate because eons and paths technically lead separate existences. Anyway, there are so many more awesome bits in Kamoyart's theory that support this whole concept, so please check out that theory. It's in the description box. It's just really cool and well worth the read, okay? Now, my personal contribution to this idea is that Aglaia walks the path of beauty and has propagation associations, and she considers Tribby, the Harmony, to be her teacher. So the fact that Aglaia is both beauty and propagation, and she took on the role of Seredra, the leader, the order of the Chrysos heirs, ties in really well with this idea that the Titans of Amphorius mimic the eons and paths of the greater universe. So bada boom, bada bing, connections made, right? Yeah? Huh? Cool. I'll also point out that Seredra has some nods to propagation as well. Notably the curious shape of her wings. Yes, they look a little bit draconic, but they also look quite a bit like the wings of the Swarm and the wings of Tayzeranth. Plus, both she and Tayzeranth share the title of Imperator, since, Tayzeranth's name is the Imperator Insectorum. Heck, maybe the reason why Seredra's so tiny is because she's supposed to reference a little bug. And maybe she's the Harmony path because she's part of a fusion dance. And as the piece de resistance, actually, let's wait to share that last bit. We're missing one critical piece of information for this last connection to make sense. So I need to add a couple more columns to my chart for all of this to make sense visually, and this is what we're left with. I know it's a bit messy, I don't know how else to display this. Oh, and since we talked about splitting paths, I did want to mention something about Tribby and Seredra, since that would be the other outcome of a theoretical collision of paths, right? The harmony and the order being assimilated together. Okay, well, the path of order being assimilated into harmony is technically something that happens in Amphorius as well. Because see, the purpose of Seredra's order, in the most practical sense, was actually unification. And after she died, that role of unification was taken over by Tribby's authority over passages. Or maybe we should call it the authority of connections. Tribby united people differently than how Seredra did, but that was still her main role within the story. And it is similar to how Enna consensually allowed themselves to be assimilated into Xipe. And the Enna of Amphoreus dies before Xipe does. Or rather, because of Xipe. In this case, Seredra kind of died because of Trivi's prophecies, sort of. Now that leaves us with two paths to address: the abundance and the veracity. Now I'm gonna slap abundance onto Earth for thematic reasons. Dan Heng was the one to take over the authority of Earth, and I think that the hints of his affiliations are hidden in his clothing design, which is a mix of both his Astral Express outfit and his Imbibitor Lunae outfit. To me, this is more than just a mere costume change. This is a representation of Dan Heng's acceptance of his past selves, something that he's been struggling with his entire life. And his past selves history is closely tied to the abundance, who is associated with trees and the flora of the earth and immortality and stuff like that. All things that are also associated with the Titan of Earth. And I think this is really fun because Express Dan Heng is the element of wind and Luofu Dan Heng is the element of water. Don't tell me it's imaginary, just it's water, okay? And since the authority of sea already belonged to High Sealans, Dan Heng couldn't really embrace his Imbibitor Lunae side. And with the authority of sky being taken over by Hyacinth, he couldn't really embrace his Astral Express side. Technically speaking, Terravox was already occupying the slot of Earth, but we've never met Terravox, and Terravox was technically the only non-humanoid of the bunch. So let's just assume that the authority of Earth was somewhat vacant. And since Terravox was a Dromus dragon, and Dan Heng is also a descendant of a dragon, then Dan Heng would have been uniquely compatible with Terravox, right? So with no sea and no sky, Dan Heng would have been forced to confront that earthly aspect of himself, his history with the abundance, the permanence of the earth. Also, I still subscribe to the theory that the abundance was also split from the permanence, so I still think it fits. But again, that's a theory, it's not technically confirmed anywhere. I just like it. Okay, so the only path left here is the path of veracity. And I think the only authority that's a good match for veracity is the Ocean Authority, which is already assigned to Nihility. This is the only part of my original theory that survives. If you made it this far, thank you. Now hear me out. Before we ever met High Sealans or got confirmation that the Ocean Protocol emulated Nihility, I was already convinced that it was aligned with veracity. And there were two big reasons for this. The first is that the Eon of Veracity, Ouroboros, is a serpent and a leviathan, and leviathans are typically sea creatures, most frequently associated with whales. So in my head I was like, okay, ocean equals whales. It's very simple math, right? And this assumption got boosted in this last patch when High Sealans literally attacked Lygus with a giant water whale. And we also knew that the Titan of the ocean, Fagusa, was all about the feast. They were obsessed with the concept of feasting. That was like their thing. But feasting is also the veracity's thing. So once again, it was simple math, right? Plus, if we're factoring in the whole Titan-Eon sort of relationship theory that we've got going on here, then it makes sense that High Sealans would be veracity because veracity fought against the propagation. In fact, most evidence suggests that it was only because of Ouroboros' endless appetite that Tazeronth was able to be defeated in the first place. And if we're factoring in that theory that Harmony is a blend of propagation, order, and beauty, and Seredra is order with propagation references, then it is worth pointing out how High Sealans fought against and killed Seredra. It is a direct representation of how Ouroboros fought against Tazeronth. But then the game was like, nope, this is Nihility. And I was all out here like, what? What do you mean Nihility? Like, I know High Sealans is super depressed and demoralized, but really? Nihility? Over veracity? Like, as far as I know, IX wasn't even involved in the events of Swarm Disaster, which is pretty on brand considering their pure apathetic nature, but that's not the point. The point is that IX has no discernible relationship to the other Eons and doesn't fit the theorized pattern at all. Veracity fits the pattern. So the only way to make this make sense is to connect IX and Ouroboros together. But not much is known about these Eons in the first place, so we don't have a whole lot to work with. Even on a conceptual level, linking their paths together is difficult. The best link I have between the concepts of veracity and nihility is just like emotional eating, I guess. And that's a terrible basis for linking two eons together. Or is it? Humor me for a second. So Ouroboros is the only known Dusk Leviathan to become an Aeon after the Dusk Leviathan Wars at the beginning of time, or at least what we think is the beginning of time, but that's a discussion for another day. Dusk Leviathans were known for devouring stars, nebula, and galaxies, which understandably upset a lot of living creatures who did not want to be eaten. And this voracious appetite likely defined Ouroboros' path of veracity when they ascended to Aeonhood. It was the path of feasting. But the veracity didn't truly run wild, at least to my knowledge, until Tazaronth ascended at the beginning of the Swarm disaster. Ouroboros went to town, feasting upon endless supplies of Tazaronth's stings, but they also vanished without a trace soon after Qlipoth sealed Tazaronth in amber. It's always suspicious when an Aeon goes missing entirely because it's nearly impossible to know what happened to them, especially when Mythos the Enigmata gets involved, which is, unfortunately, what happened here. History fictionologists obscured what records we did have of the events leading up to and following Ouroboros' disappearance. But generally speaking, if an Aeon disappears, we just assume that they're dead. Akavili went missing, so they're presumed dead. Adrilla went missing, so they're presumed dead, and Long vanished without a trace, and also is presumed dead. And while Enna didn't go missing necessarily, they did disappear when they were absorbed into Xipe. So I guess there's that. And according to Kafka, when two paths collide, that's one of the only ways to kill an Aeon, so Enna should theoretically be dead as well. So I'm kind of wondering if something similar to what happened with Enna actually happened with Ouroboros. Like, I wonder if Ouroboros allowed their path to be assimilated into IX's path of nihility. Because the two actually have a surprising amount of things in common. For starters, Ouroboros was called a black hole with thought, and IX is quite literally a black hole, or at least they look like one. They're often represented by one. And interestingly, black holes are most typically formed when massive stars collapse on themselves near the end of their life cycle, and Ouroboros was apparently born from stars. So we could assume that if they were born from the stars, then Ouroboros could have collapsed into a black hole. Although I will point out that all Aeons are referred to in Chinese as gods of the stars or star gods, and I don't really know if that means that they're born from stars or if they're just gods that live among the stars. It's still worth mentioning as a little caveat. Either way, found that interesting. And behavior-wise, black holes don't really eat, but they are known for having gravitational fields that are so intense that nothing can escape its pull, not even light. And they will continue to grow over time by consuming whatever gets close. Now, on the one hand, we can easily link this to the Veracity's desire to consume everything in sight, but we can also point to how no one can resist Nihility's pull once they've come into contact with it. But here's where things get interesting. According to Swarm Disaster, Tragedy, and Insects, the Dwindling of Stars, Ouroboros had spawn or followers known as depth crawlers. During the Swarm Disaster, depth crawlers were capable of raising entire planets, but they appear to have devolved over time into sea creatures who lived somewhat peacefully aboard the Luofu. They also mysteriously disappeared one day, just like Ouroboros did. And apparently, the depth crawlers were very similar to Void Song whales, and Void Song whales are like these big cosmic space whales, like the one that the Trailblazer saw when they first boarded the Astral Express, and also like the one on the ceiling of the Express. It does make you wonder if all of the whales that we see inside of the Scale Gorge waterscape are actually referencing depth crawlers. That would be really, really interesting because I still think Void Song whales are a species of Leviathan, and if they are a similar creature to depth crawlers, and depth crawlers are followers or spawn of Ouroboros, and Ouroboros is also a Leviathan, then that's actually quite interesting, but it's also not really what I want to talk about right now. So in this Swarm Disaster passage, the depth crawler apparently ate so much that it became, quote, overwhelmed by tedious loneliness. And as you threaten to kill it, it just sits quietly and accepts its inevitable death, as if it believes that its life no longer has any meaning. It's like it became nihilistic. Now, isn't that a bit odd that a sea creature feasted so much that it became consumed by loneliness and then succumbed to nihility? Like, doesn't that sound a bit too much like what happened with Hycelens? Like, as soon as there were no more feasts to be had, she fell into nihility. And it's also worth mentioning that she was the only surviving sea siren, just like Ouroboros is allegedly the only surviving Dusk Leviathan. Also, Hycelens has a lot of abilities linked to music, and black holes technically do sing, and so do whales. Now, Ouroboros apparently disappeared around the same time that Enno was assimilated into Xipe during the swarm disaster, and as far as I know, there are no references to IX before that historical event. So maybe there were 2 assimilations at that time. And it is a little strange that Izumo's Magatsu no Murakami says that the only one who knows the answer to whether or not the veracity was involved with Izumo's devoured history is IX. But then, if you think about it, why would IX even know anything about that? They don't care to learn about anything. That's like their shtick. They're the Nihility. They don't care. Why do they know the answer to this question? Doesn't it feel like there's a deeper connection between Nihility and veracity being hinted at here? And if I may push this conspiracy a little bit further, IX's databank entry suggests that what we see of IX isn't actually its real body, because its real body is being obscured by a dark mist. So it is possible that IX and Ouroboros might even share a body and we just can't see it because of the mist. Also, there are a bunch of references to saving the god within the abyss when it comes to IX, and it's really odd because this doesn't actually happen with any other Aeon as far as I know. So I'm not entirely sure why there's a focus on saving this god from despair and loneliness. It just kind of makes it sound like Ouroboros ate too much and got super lonely and depressed and then fell into the abyss and covered itself with a thick blanket of mist. Which weirdly is what happened with Hycealans when you think about it. When she lost the ability to feast at the end of the last cycle, she sank into the depths of the ocean's abyss, and obscured herself from mortal eyes using her sea siren illusion magic. And as I continue to write this, I am realizing I am convincing myself that Ouroboros and IX might actually just be the exact same Aeon on a path switch. And the more I look, the more connections I find. I mean, even the name IX and Ouroboros match here, because like, IX is the Roman numerals for the number 9, and the number 9 is not just associated with dragons in Chinese mythology, but when it comes to numerology, the number 9 represents cyclicality but not completion. It's the ending of one cycle and the beginning of another, in eternity, basically, an eternal loop. And that is exactly what an Ouroboros is. It's a snake that eats its own tail in an endless loop. It's a cycle that will never complete itself. Isn't that weird? Am I crazy? I feel kind of crazy at the end of this. I didn't expect to actually feel crazy, but this entire video ended up being an excuse for me to talk about why I think Ouroboros ate itself into a food coma and became the Nihility, or was absorbed into the Nihility. Either works. I was also just determined to not let this fully edited video go to waste, though I did my best to rework a theory that had already been disproven. Let's see how long this one lasts. Anyway, that just about does it for me. I hope you enjoyed this little rambly stream of consciousness kind of theory, but not really a proper theory-ish kind of video. I am gonna end things here, so thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves out there, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.